Hello everybody, welcome to the Court of the Digester. Let's get straight down to this one. It's an article from the 13th of August and it is written by a gentleman called Lukas Sakowski, and I hope that I pronounced the name correct. I don't have good form on that front, I'm afraid. I'm always getting it wrong. The headline is, "When I was 14, a 40-year-old transsexual manipulated me into changing sex. For years, I secretly took puberty blockers until I finally saw through the lies of my trans activists. This is my warning for parents everywhere." When I was very young, I was manipulated into sex reassignment, also known as sex gender correction or sex gender transition, by a transsexual man in his mid-40s. For several years, he gave me puberty blockers, dangerous substances that block the effects of testosterone and hormones of the opposite sex, estrogens. Just before I turned 18, a psychologist, psychiatrist, and sexologist, after one visit, without any tests, fabricated a diagnosis of transsexualism and referred me officially for a sex change, which should never have happened. Currently, I've had a reversal procedure, returning to the true sex I was born with, which I am very happy about. The story is described below. I'm gay. That has a lot to do with the story. When I was 12, I struggled with a lack of self-acceptance. I already knew that I liked people of the same sex. For the first time, I experienced my childhood crush on vacation, where my family and I went every summer. Fishing every day at 5 a.m, I met a boy a year older than me who was there in summer camp. I felt for him what I would call exactly what I wrote a moment ago, a childlike crush with no reference to sexuality or physical contact at all. I was 7, maybe 8 years old. It is at this age that many children first find themselves with this type of innocent fascination with a person of the opposite sex, or for gays and lesbians of the same sex. I never met him again, but subsequently events in my life clearly indicated that I like people of the same sex. It was only later that I began to realise that this was unusual, even considered undesirable. The awareness that I was attracted to people of the same sex matured in me very slowly and gradually. Over time, being in the older classes of primary school and then junior high school, I knew that I did not like the girls at all, neither emotionally nor physically. Same-sex couples were not accepted and were actively condemned. In fact, they were ridiculed, and calling someone gay was an offensive epithet. As I pondered my future, I increasingly thought that a normal, healthy gay life would be impossible. I also developed a belief that same-sex attraction is wrong. Contrary to stereotypes, it did not result from religious lessons, because I met a similar, only milder negative view of homosexuality first in high school. I can't recall our quite strict nun in junior high school ever expressing a negative attitude towards gays. It's difficult to hide homosexual orientation in adolescence, and as many lesbian and gay men know, it is a great reason for peers who find out about it or suspect it to ridicule, offend, insult or threaten by, for example, saying that this will be broadcast to everybody. Being the object of mockery, harassment and gossip, also from colleagues with whom we've had good relations until recently, also causes one to be perplexed and confused about feelings and identity, and to constantly compare oneself and one's development with others. One former close friend pretends not to know you, another spits in your direction, and so on. This also greatly contributed to the belief that homosexuality was wrong and deepened my disorder of body perception. It is not without significance that my negative attitude towards gay people, important for further events, was also influenced by the image of homosexual people in the media. They often showed pictures from pride parades in which gays, fetishists and exhibitionists were seen strangely dressed and acting in a disturbing way, and I, like so many other homosexual men, absolutely did not identify with such patterns and behaviours. I don't identify with them to this day. Such media coverage reinforced my belief that homosexuality was something strange and repulsive, and in any case related to disorders, since individuals who appear to be mentally and sexually disturbed are shown as gay and seem to be almost the only ones who openly talk about it. I was not aware that the media message does not reflect reality, that there are many ordinary gays outside the clubbing, exhibitionist, parading subculture. I do not condemn the latter, but I do criticise it for going too far in the wrong direction. Unfortunately, the stereotype of coarse, flashy, immature and hysterical, theatrical or exhibitionist gays manifesting their sexuality is still promoted by the gay subculture in some mainstream media, thus harming the next generation of young homosexual boys. As a child and a teenager, I was under the delusion that this kind of provocative, aggressive style was standard for gay people, which became another cause of my denial of my orientation. I gave up hope of finding a regular gay boyfriend because I started to think that normal gays were almost non-existent. Today, after many years of observing the LGBT activist community, I know that the reason for the dominance of such controversial people or motifs at parades is that many in LGBT organisations, the greater influence on their form and activity had and still has not homosexual people, but queers, fetishists and other special activists who link up to the theme of homosexuality, which gathers more and more social sympathy. At the age of 13, struggling with a huge dilemma regarding my orientation, the impossibility of dating someone normal for this age, and increasing sex dysphoria, I came across the program, and it's called Rozmowo Utuku, run by Ewa Drizga, in which transsexuals were presented. This was a program, I'm assuming here, this was a program on Polish television that was available at the time. It was then that the thought first occurred to me, he continues, that this was a topic I should be interested in. Searching for information on the internet, I came across a forum for trans people. Quite quickly, I got in touch with one of its users, a 40-year-old male to female transsexual, for who the purpose of this text I will call Ewa. The communication between us moved to the then popular Gadu Gadu chat room and was quite intense. I turned to Ewa with problems regarding identity, orientation, emotions, school and others. She, for that's what is written, she was often unemployed and was from a small town in Opolski Voivodeship and had plenty of time to correspond with me. Already in the first stage of our online acquaintance, she persuaded me to use feminine forms instead of masculine ones. It was persuasion, a suggestion that I should not be afraid to write like a girl. Over time, there were attempts to convince me that I should wear girlish clothes, apply makeup and paint my nails. Eva, like many other trans people, which I found out bluntly when I met many people from this environment, couldn't stand gay people. There it is. Couldn't stand gay people. There it is, right in your face. Some of us have known that for a very long time. Very long time. The article continues. She had a keen hatred of homosexuality, which she told me on numerous occasions. She criticised them, ridiculed, devalued and demonised them. This aversion also confirmed to me that gay people are bad people. Transsexual Ewa was someone important to me, and although I met her only on the internet, I could write to her about various matters about which I did not feel that I could trust anyone else. The lack of direct live contact, the whole thing took place via the internet, or this program called Gadu Gadu, was very conducive to this teenage naivety. When I was 14, the topic of puberty blockers came up in our conversation. Ewa offered to send me a medicine called Androcur. It is obtainable only by prescription. Cyproteron acetate with anti-androgenic effect. In other words, brackets, close brackets, it inhibits testosterone. The puberty blocker has many side effects, some of which are labelled common. These included, according to the leaflet, toxic liver damage, including jaundice, hepatitis, liver failure, depressive moods, gynecomastia, fatigue, hot flashes, benign brain tumours, or meningiomas as they're known, benign and malignant liver tumours, thromboembolic disorders, and osteoporosis. After about half a year, when I wrote to you that I had abdominal pain on the right side under the ribs, she said that she forgot to tell me that together with Androcur, I was supposed to take daily a drug protective for the liver with Silymarin, which was sold over the counter. A few years later, at the round of 18, I had a densitometry, which is a measurement of bone density. It showed advanced osteoporosis. The doctor describing the results said that I had almost a quarter loss of bone mass relative to the normal one for my age. A densometric examination repeated after 10 years, several years after I'd reversed the sex change and discontinued all hormonal drugs, showed osteopenia despite the correct diet, vitamin D supplementation, and a very active lifestyle, which I began when I got over the trauma of sex reassignment, so-called gender correction. Less than a year after I started taking puberty blockers, when I was about 15, you also started sending me a prescription-only estrogen medication, and in this case, all kept secret from my family. You could say that I'd already started full hormonal sex reassignment therapy at the time. Not only did I block my testosterone, but I also took an estradiol derivative in pills. I felt more and more discomfort and frustration when someone referred to me as male. When I had to wear some typically masculine clothing, I also felt a great aversion to my body and its masculine features. I felt repulsion and shame. You are the forum and portals for trans people, as well as the message of transsexual activists, confirmed me in this alienation and pushed me to the next steps of changing my sex, like members of a sect pushing a novice to more and more drastic steps. If someone asked me then whether I was happy that I was changing my sex, I would not only confirm, but even reply emphatically. Therefore, if I had been polled at the time as to whether I was happy with my sex change, I would have been enthusiastically saying yes. At that time, I succumbed to the phenomena of cognitive dissonance. So despite the terrible feeling about my body and the situation, I had the impression that I was going in the right direction and that the sex transition helped me. The more difficult it was for me to be a (brackets trans) woman, the more I denied it and justified for myself the rightness of continuing this madness. As well as all the false information published by transgender activists on the internet, along with giving them the appearance of reliable knowledge by ideologically driven sexologists, psychologists, and psychiatrists, you rooted me in the idea that what was happening must be right. So an adult transsexual male reassigning his body to a female by sex reassignment got me. 14, to speak and write in the female form, i.e. using feminine grammatical forms in Polish to refer to oneself, completely messing with my developing psyche. He also encouraged me to paint my face and dress more girly. My clothes were not particularly feminine because they were mostly loose, but nevertheless women's sweatshirts or trousers. Anyway, for this reason, you were regularly reprimanding me to dress up in a more feminine way. Many times she directly said that I should start wearing high heels, skirts, dresses, etc., which I did not do and for which I often felt that I had to explain myself to her. After a relatively short period of using makeup, I practically gave up most of the typical feminine beauty products. However, I did not associate that with the fact that the idea of sex change was bad for me. I found the idea rather original and comfortable. At that time, much good was written and said about virile, resourceful and strong women. I also played games like Tomb Raider regularly, and the archetype of this kind of woman impressed me. It sounds childish, but I was a teenager. However, I was urged not only to change my pronouns and feminine style of dress, but above all, to identify myself as a transsexual woman, and to take strong drugs that change metabolism and hormonal balance, negatively affecting the development of my body. Parallel to the events I have described, I started going for diagnostic visits to a sexology and psychology clinic in Poznan, where a psychologist conducted the clinical interview and diagnostic tests with me. In addition, I was also genetically tested at that time to see if I had sexual development disorders, also known as hermaphroditism or intersex. It showed that I have a normal male karyotype, 46XY. I do not remember exactly how long this psychological, sexological evaluation lasted. I remember only that it was a process lasting several months, not a single consultation. At the very end, I had to go to a case conference of specialists at the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan. Finally, the psychologist conducting the diagnosis, together with the professor, gave an opinion about me in December of 2008. I was told that what to say to show I was trans. Posts that I read on a forum for transsexuals saying that I have felt like a girl since childhood did not help, as well as other tips suggested by EUA, in which I sincerely believed at the time. In short, the opinion said that I had sex dysphoria, then called sex disapproval syndrome, and I was a teenager who did not accept my homosexual orientation, striving to change my sex to be perceived as a heterosexual woman. After all, a gay man after a sex change will still be gay, but from a social point of view, will also be a heterosexual woman. Honest to goodness. They said a quote. Lukasz's Sikowski's homosexual tendencies, which he is poorly aware of, accompanied by high psychological discomfort resulting from the lack of self-acceptance in the role of gay, caused him to adopt the idea of being a transsexual person as a more acceptable option for his self-esteem. It says, inter alia, the diagnosis was correct, and the whole process carried out by the psychologist was thorough and insightful. But I completely denied it. In which, of course, I was strongly supported by EUA and online educational materials from websites, forums, and foundations addressed to trans people. They were convinced that transition was the best choice, which was confirmed by specialists. Later, I tried to ask for at least puberty blockers in this clinic to have them officially and not from EUA, but the sexologist in charge did not agree. Time and the course of events have shown that this decision was the right one. My situation, and I was 15 at the time of this diagnosis, was that I was still taking puberty blockers and hormones from EUA. Now she was sending me prescriptions in her name, not purchased drug packages, which I hid from everyone. I lived with the belief that a sex change was the right thing for me. Apart from brief periods of looking much more feminine, I generally did not attach much importance to it. I spent a lot of time at home anyway, and there was little opportunity for any female expression. When I didn't have to go to school, there were times when I literally didn't leave my apartment for 2 or 3 weeks. I broke off my childhood friendships out of shame and fear, and they often fell apart because almost no one wanted to hang out with the freak I was. I didn't have any new friends. I was very alienated. With only online acquaintances, especially with EUA. In fact, I forgot what it's like to go out for a walk or meet my friends. I missed it very much because I grew up in a block of flats where the norm was that after doing your homework and during holidays from morning to evening with a break for lunch, you would run around the yard with your friends. Then such normal good things started to scare me. Just leaving the house could make me panic. In addition to my surroundings, puberty blockers have had an impact on my alienation, as depressive moods are among the common side effects of their use. When someone is under their influence and becomes depressed, it is much more difficult for them to understand their own emotions and motivations, and thus stop the process of sex reassignment, no matter how harmful it may be. Therefore, although 60 to 90% of people grow out of sex dysphoria, which is confirmed by numerous scientific studies, among those who have already started taking medication, the percentage of people whose dysphoria has passed is decreasing. However, at least in some of them, not because sex reassignment works for them, but because they are mentally unable to understand what is happening to them and decide to reverse their sex reassignment because puberty blockers deregulate the maturation process of the brain. I was just such a case. What's more, puberty blockers and hormonal drugs administered at such a young age, in addition to affecting the brain and psyche, causing depression, also cause menopausal-like symptoms. I remember waking up many times at night all sweaty, and the sheets were as wet as if they had just been taken out of the washing machine. In addition, there were irregular hot flashes or sudden states of emotional agitation. These unpleasant experiences may additionally encourage you to decide on further sex change to have it all behind you. These unpleasant experiences may additionally encourage to have it all behind you. Sex reassignment is thus a self-perpetuating, masochistic merry-go-round that is very difficult to give up. Then came the time of high school, where I tried to function as a girl, also periodically trying to be more feminine at Ewer's persuasion. Perhaps she took some pleasure in seeing me as a hyper-feminine woman. Every now and then she would insist that I start wearing heels or dresses, which I did not give in to, but tried other ways. It looked rather comical because I neither liked nor knew how to put on makeup. I also remember how annoyed I was wasting time on such things, so again, after some time, I gave up considering myself a virile woman, a pattern that I followed. I didn't pretend to be a woman, but I actually felt that I was doing what I should and told myself that I was a woman. It wasn't a game or a trick or a dress-up. It didn't have a sexual, fetishistic or theatrical undertone to me. I didn't take it as dressing up as a woman or playing a woman. It was the result of inner confusion and telling myself that my problems with the lack of self-acceptance will end if I cultivate a female identity. He's running from his gayness. Of course, it is not possible to function as a woman when you're a man. However, I was convinced that when I turned 18 and formally changed my sex, i.e. changed my identity documents to female, I would start a normal life and everything would change. This was the vision of the world transgender activists and organisations are promoting by this toxic ideology. I found problems with not fitting in the role of a girl in external factors, sometimes blaming transphobia and bad society. I kept denying that I might be gay. Coming back to my story, shortly before I turned 18, I went to a psychologist in Poznan. She was known in the transgender community. She was recommended on forums. She was officially recommended as a reliable expert by the Transfusia Foundation. I had the impression that she was the kind person with a sense of mission. I explained to her that I had been receiving puberty blockers and hormones for several years from a transgender person I met online, and that my parents did not know about it. It didn't bother her. Quite the contrary, she expressed her enthusiasm that I could be myself from such a young age. By the time I started college, I already looked, at least if you didn't pay attention to detail, like a young woman. I had no beard, my features were as delicate as possible, my hair was long, my figure was feminine. Somehow I had to control over my voice and was able to get the higher pitch. Due to taking blockers and hormones from the age of 14 to 15, by the time I was 18, my breasts had grown, my waistline had narrowed and my pelvis was wide. However, very quickly it turned out that the old problems did not disappear. It's a myth that sex transition cures depression, social relationship problems, autism, borderline personality disorder, non-acceptance of one's sexual orientation, suicidal thoughts or other problems. I have already encountered accusations of transphobia many times when I wrote that people with gender dysphoria, especially young ones, should go to psychotherapy, not be directed to sex reassignment. However, according to the psychiatrists and psychologists in the increasingly profitable industry of sex reassignment, the problems of such people are caused by sex nonconformity, transsexualism, and denying them a sex transition is transphobia, in my opinion. In my opinion, this is pushing people with serious problems onto a path that not only does not help, but even destroys health and life. During my studies, when theoretically I should lead a happy life of a trans woman having a successful passing, my doubts intensified even more. When I planned an orchidectomy, the removal of the testicles, for the first time around the age of 20, stress and tension were building up in me. The approaching date effectively motivated me to cancel the procedure. Ewer expressed disapproval of this. She also boasted that she, using some administrative tricks, managed to get the operation on the National Health Fund by fabricating a diagnosis of testicular disease. On the other hand, she did not have the full operation of sewing the penis inside to create an imitation of a vagina like most transsexual women. To myself, I explained the cancellation of the operation with objective reasons, financial times issues. I rationalised it, but deep down I felt relieved. I postponed it for later. I can't remember if it was a half or a year or more. Months passed and I also cancelled the second appointment. This time I didn't book another one. Ultimately, the surgery did not take place. A light amidst all this darkness. And that's very good, because if I'd underwent this operation, I would have to take hormonal drugs that are harmful to my health for the rest of my life after detransition. And I would also have sexual problems and become infertile. I saved myself, thanks to my own sanity, a deep and increasingly conscious feeling that the whole of the idea of sex change was an absurd and pathological idea, as well as biological knowledge. I was already studying biology at the time and distancing myself from UA. I was also plagued by the sunk cost effect, i.e. the feeling that I had already lost so much time, health, nerves, social contacts and money on the sex reassignment process that it would be pointless to withdraw now, even if it was the best thing I could do. This cognitive bias is certainly another reason for lowering the detransition statistics. I can only imagine how much people who have undergone sex reassignment surgery suffer and deny that it was a mistake so as not to go mad with despair. It also explains why they so passionately attack people like me. Gay men. That's people like you. Gay men. Why they attack people like me who have detransitioned, who have reversed their sex change. Shame and self-loathing are enormous in such a situation. I remember very well how afraid I was to admit to myself and then to others that the sex change was a mistake. Some, instead of accepting that they made a bad decision or were pushed or manipulated towards it, as I was, and trying to reverse its effects, will use every possible means to divert attention from this fact and remain in the pathological situation. An important, though not primary factor in the whole process was the acquisition of biological knowledge. Because I studied biology and took it really seriously, I learned a lot from it. I wrote my master's thesis in biochemistry, histology and genetics. Overall, I think I benefited a lot from these studies and learned a lot, not only in the context of the acquired knowledge, but also the ability to consciously and intelligently navigate the natural sciences, read scientific research, verify information, and use other tools of this kind that I have been developing to this day. Thanks to this, I began to notice how much of the dogma present in the narratives of transgender activists are disinformation, manipulation, and lies for the sake of concealment called modern science, in which, in fact, they have nothing in common. Mostly through constantly repeating the science, and especially supposedly psychology and sexology backs up their thesis, they managed to convince unsuspecting people like me in the past. To this day, I remember how I presented these formulas to my parents. After all, that's what the science says. These are facts resulting from the opinions of sexologists. Thanks to biological, or more broadly natural science knowledge, I saw how absurd and inconsistent with the facts are views such as biological sex does not exist. Sex is a spectrum. There are many sexes, and one of them is transsexuality. You can choose your sex. Sex is determined by the brain and psyche, not biological sex. Gender dysphoria is irreversible. Transsexuality is inborn. These and other disinformation theses approaching denial of sex are just activist wishes and have not the slightest support in reliable, well-established science unrelated to activism. In May or June 2014, on the occasion of endocrinology tests, I went for a free psychological consultation as part of a day in the hospital. Although it was just one visit, which lasted about an hour and a half, it gave me a lot to think about. During this visit, I did not admit that I was thinking about reversing the sex change. I felt ashamed, and when the psychologist brought up the subject directly, I denied it, but she asked me the right question, and it made me think further. She asked me the right question. In the summer of 2014, I decided to stop taking hormonal drugs. A little later, I admitted to my family that the sex change was a mistake. I also severed all contact with UA. I was wondering how to go back to male personal data, as there was no legal way to do this. I turned to the trans forum for help. However, I was met with hostility there. I was considered a traitor. Some people wrote that if I have to reverse the transition, I should do it abroad, not in Poland, because I would make Polish courts less willing to issue positive judgments in regards to trans. The fact that for more than a year since I started talking about sex on this blog, I have been harassed and slandered by trans activists and their environment was also not accidental. I found out some time ago that the community of Polish transgender activists knew about return to my true sex. I was even blackmailed by one of the country's most recognisable transgender people that my private history could be revealed. In fact, that's largely prompted me to make this coming out. At the time, having legally reverted my true gender, I was able to have breast removal surgery, which the doctors had previously refused to do. It was technically a gynecomastia procedure, but the surgeon told me that functionally it would be a full mastectomy. I started taking puberty blockers and hormonal drugs so early and took them for so long that the glandular tissue grew, like as if it was in a biological woman. My chest is still a bit deformed to this day, and the scars from the surgery are painful. I also have a wider female pelvis that I can't do anything about. Early blockers and hormones led to female bone structure, or that's the facsimile of female bone structure. This example illustrates well how dangerous sex change is for health, because although I have not undergone any serious sex change surgery, castration, the orchidectomy, anyway, in order to at least partially undo the effects of taking puberty blockers and female hormones, I had to have a serious surgery under full anaesthesia. It was a difficult operation for me, the effects of which I had to deal with for a long time, being forced to additional costly procedures even later because of painful and unsightly scars. Although my gonads have fortunately returned to testosterone production after some time after stopping the blockers and hormones, so I do not have to take it in the form of liver-damaging drugs, it took a long time before I stopped being mistaken for a woman again and again, despite cutting my hair short and wearing men's clothes. Even today, it sometimes happens that someone will call me ma'am when talking on the phone, but situations such as the one that happened to me recently, a neighbour with a small child riding with me in the elevator corrected her several times when she called me miss. They don't make me angry or sad, but they are funny. I will probably have softer, feminized facial features forever. The formal and medical detransition is behind me, but I've struggled with the consequences of what happened and still struggle to this day. I will always have an increased risk of various diseases, osteopenia or a deformed chest. I have bad memories of this trauma, the process of mutilation of the body and psyche called sex transition or sex reassignment. The dispute on this topic is different from the way it is currently stereotypically presented. It is not, as activists portray it, that we have poor and oppressed transgender people on the good side of history and transphobic bigots on the other side who get bored of bullying gays and switch to trans people. The fact is that a large part of the critics of trans activists and their demands are gays and lesbians, who in English-speaking countries have started to set up new organisations, LGB, without trans and non-binary people, and classic feminists, and more scientists, doctors and psychologists. The right wing primarily captures and publicises this conflict, but it is not the main party to the dispute here, presenting it on the basis that anyone who is against the demands of transsexuals supports the right wing is a demagogic falsification of reality. Personally, I am definitely closer to left-wing views, and I would not like my story to be used for political games. The transition and its effect cost me a lot of physical and mental suffering, which are hard to describe in words. Because they